Forced to marry the Empire's coldest alpha, she stayed silent until he chose her above all. The sun had just begun its slow descent over the Empire, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold. From her window in the modest chambers of her family's estate, Lyra watched the horizon, her fingers lightly tracing the carved patterns of the sill. She had been summoned, unexpectedly, to the capital. The summons bore a seal she had never seen before, the mark of Alpha Kale, the coldest, most feared ruler in all the Empire. Whispers had always surrounded Kale. They said he commanded the fiercest warriors and could summon shadows to do his bidding. They said his eyes were as sharp as blades, capable of seeing fear and weakness in a single glance. And yet here was Lyra, summoned to stand before him as his bride with no choice, no escape. Her heart beat with both fear and defiance. She had always been a quiet girl, careful with words but stubborn in spirit. She would not beg, she would not cry, she would not show the trembling that clawed at her chest. If she had to go, she would face this alpha as herself, silent, strong, unyielding. The journey to Kale's fortress was long and filled with tension. Lyra was escorted by 2 guards of her house, who barely dared speak in the presence of her anxiety. The roads were lined with dense forests, their shadows stretching like fingers over the horse-drawn carriage. Lyra's eyes roamed the horizon, not seeing the beauty of the trees or the rivers, only the looming reality of what awaited her. The fortress appeared at dusk, its dark towers piercing the sky. Lightning cracked in the distance, though the air was still, as if the storm was summoned by the fortress itself. Lyra swallowed hard and stepped down from the carriage. The stones of the courtyard were cold beneath her feet, and the wind carried whispers she could not understand. She kept her head high. Her silence was her armor. Inside the fortress, the grandeur was undeniable. Walls lined with tapestries depicting battles, halls echoing with footsteps that were not her own. Servants passed by without looking at her, their faces neutral, trained to ignore visitors until commanded otherwise. She felt as though she were walking into a world not meant for mortals. And then she saw him. Alpha Kale stood at the end of the hall, his figure towering, cloaked in black that seemed to drink the light. His face was pale, sculpted as though carved from marble, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray, cold, and piercing. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply watched. Lyra's heart stuttered. Most girls would have knelt or bowed, trembling and pleading for mercy or favor. But Lyra stayed upright, her gaze meeting his without fear, though her hands clenched at her sides. The hall seemed to hush around them, as if even the air feared to disturb the moment. Lyra of House Vera. Kale's voice was low, each word deliberate. You have been brought here to become my wife. Lyra inclined her head slightly, a gesture of respect rather than submission. She did not speak. Her silence was deliberate. She would not offer him the satisfaction of a word that might betray fear. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, curved Kale's lips. He stepped closer, each movement measured, almost ceremonial. You will live here, he said, gesturing to the halls surrounding them. You will follow the rules of this house. You will obey in ways necessary for survival. That is all I require. Lyra nodded once. Nothing more. The attendants guided her to her chamber, a room large enough to be mistaken for a hall itself, adorned with rich fabrics and dark wood. The bed was massive, draped in black and silver, and the air smelled faintly of incense and something else she could not name. A subtle, unsettling magic that made the hairs on her arms rise. She did not unpack. She did not sit. She simply stood in the center of the room, listening to the silence that pressed against her ears. Night came quickly, carrying with it a chill that seeped through stone walls. Lyra sat by the window, staring out at the fortress gardens where shadows moved like living creatures. She had heard stories, tales whispered by those who feared the Alpha, of curses that lingered in the halls, spirits of the fallen, and shadows that obeyed Kael as if he were a god. A sudden movement caught her eye. A figure, dark as night, slipped between the trees, silent and purposeful. Lyra's pulse quickened, but she remained still. Her silence had taught her to watch, to wait, to observe. The figure stopped at the edge of the garden and then vanished as if it had never been there. She drew her cloak tighter around her shoulders and turned back to the room. A soft sound, almost a sigh, seemed to echo in the hall outside her chamber. Lyra paused, straining to hear. Nothing. Perhaps it was the wind, or perhaps the fortress was already testing her. The next morning Cale summoned her to the main hall. Courtiers and warriors lined the walls, their eyes sharp, assessing her like one would a delicate weapon. Cale did not introduce her. He did not smile. He simply gestured to a seat at the high table where she was to dine under his scrutiny. Lyra obeyed silently, sitting with her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Every movement was observed, every breath counted. She could feel Cale's eyes on her, heavy and unyielding. He was watching for weakness, for fear, for the slightest hint that she might be as fragile as everyone said. But she remained composed. The meal was quiet, punctuated only by the scraping of utensils and the soft rustle of fabrics. Cale finally spoke, his voice smooth and commanding. "You will learn the ways of this house. You will learn its secrets, its rules, and you will learn your place, not just as my wife, but as someone who matters. If you survive, you will find your strength here." Lyra's lips pressed together. She did not reply. Her silence spoke more than words ever could. She was not afraid to survive. She was determined to understand, to endure, to claim her place, even in a fortress built on fear and shadows. As the day passed, Lyra explored the halls of the fortress. She noticed tapestries that moved slightly, not with wind, but as if alive, their threads whispering old battles and ancient magic. Statues seemed to watch her, and mirrors reflected moments that had not yet happened. A chill ran down her spine, but she walked on. Her silence was no longer just defiance. It was armor. That evening, Cale summoned her to the library, a room vast enough to hold thousands of tomes and artifacts. He did not speak as she entered. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. "You will not speak unless spoken to," he said finally, "but you may observe. That is your first lesson." Lyra inclined her head. She did not question. She had learned that in this house, questions could be dangerous. She wandered the library, touching the spines of books that smelled of age and secrets. She paused at one shelf where a faint glow emanated from the pages of a single tome. Her curiosity drew her closer. The moment her fingers brushed the book, shadows gathered in the corners of the room. They whispered her name, soft and melodic, almost tempting her to fear. But she did not step back. She did not scream. She only stared, calm but alert, as the shadows danced around her. Cale's voice broke the tension, low and commanding. "Do you feel it?" Lyra nodded once, her eyes steady. "I do. Good," he said. "You will need to feel it to survive. To stand beside me, you must understand what haunts this house. You must understand what haunts me." Lyra remained silent, absorbing his words. She did not yet understand the depth of what he meant, but she understood that her strength would be tested, not just by the fortress, but by the Alpha himself. That night, as she lay in the massive bed, Lyra thought of the shadows, the whispers, and the cold, unyielding figure of Cale. She thought of the journey she had been forced to take, and the path that now lay before her. She did not know if she would survive the trials ahead, but she knew one thing: she would not break. And in the quiet of the fortress, where shadows listened and walls held secrets, a single whisper brushed against her ear. Lyra, her eyes flew open. The room was empty. The shadows in the corners were still, watching, waiting. The whisper had vanished, but its meaning lingered, heavy in the air. Lyra drew the covers around her shoulders and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would meet the Alpha again. And this time she would be ready, not with fear but with silence, strength, and the courage to face whatever this empire, this fortress, and this cold Alpha could throw at her. For the first time since the summons, Lyra allowed herself a small thought. Perhaps silence could speak louder than any word. And perhaps Cale, the coldest Alpha in the Empire, was about to discover that the morning sun filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the fortress, casting long, pale beams across the stone floor. Lyra rose early, as she always did, and stood by the window listening to the fortress waking around her. Even in daylight, the halls seemed alive with whispers. Shadows stretched along the walls, moving as if they had a life of their own. She dressed simply, her hand steady, her mind alert. Silence had become her shield, but she sensed that the fortress would demand more than quiet obedience. It wanted understanding, courage, and perhaps, if fate allowed, a spark of defiance. Her first task that day was not a lesson in etiquette, nor a meeting with Cale. It was a tour, an introduction to the heart of the fortress, where the power of the Alpha pulsed through every stone and every corridor. Cale walked beside her, his steps silent, his presence commanding. He did not speak as they moved through the halls lined with ancient armor and tapestries depicting battles long past. His gaze was distant, thoughtful, but occasionally flicked to Lyra, assessing, measuring. "You will need to know this place," he said at last, his voice low. "The fortress is more than walls. It is alive. It watches, remembers, and tests all who enter." Lyra nodded, keeping her expression neutral. She had already felt its presence, the subtle pressure of eyes she could not see, the faint whispers that tickled the edge of her hearing. She had learned to trust her instincts. That instinct told her that the fortress was not merely stone and magic, but a living thing tied to Cale himself. Their first stop was the library, the room that had fascinated her the night before. It was even more immense in daylight, filled with shelves that stretched higher than any mortal could reach. Tomes, scrolls, and artifacts filled the space, some glowing faintly, as if powered by the knowledge they contained. "You will spend time here," Cale said, his gray eyes fixed on her. "Knowledge is a weapon, and in this fortress you will need every weapon you can wield, mental, magical, and otherwise." Lyra's fingers brushed the spines of the books. She felt the pulse of hidden energy, faint but undeniable, as though the books themselves recognized her presence. She wondered if Cale had chosen her because of this, or despite it. The day passed with lessons in observation and patience. Cale did not explain everything. He simply watched, testing her reactions as she navigated hidden corridors and strange artifacts. At times she felt the cold weight of his judgment, and at other times a silent approval, subtle and almost imperceptible. It was in the afternoon that the first true test came. A sudden scream echoed through the halls, sharp and urgent. Lyra's heart leapt, but she did not hesitate. Cale's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, and she followed instinctively as he moved toward the source of the noise. In one of the outer courtyards, a shadowed figure crouched over a servant, its form twisting unnaturally, dark energy radiating from it. The servant struggled, but the shadow's power pinned him in place. Lyra froze for only a moment. The shadow was unlike anything she had imagined. Its form flickered between human and something inhuman, its voice a low hiss that echoed in her mind. Cale stepped forward, his presence commanding. The shadow recoiled slightly. As if aware of his authority, he drew a line in the air with his hand, and the shadows quivered, retreating to the edges of the courtyard. "Stand back," he said, his voice cold but not unkind. Lyra did not move. Instead, she noticed the servant struggling against invisible bonds, his eyes wide with fear. She remembered the training from her youth, the lessons in quick thinking and calm observation. Slowly, carefully, she reached toward the magical bindings with her own energy, tentative but determined. To her surprise, the shadows hesitated, then receded, as though her will was stronger than she expected. The servant fell to the ground, gasping, and Lyra helped him up. She did not look to Cale for approval, but she felt it anyway, his gaze lingering on her, a flicker of something unspoken passing through his gray eyes. "Not bad," he said quietly. "You have courage. That will keep you alive longer than obedience ever could." Lyra only inclined her head. Words were unnecessary. She could feel the weight of his notice, heavy and unsettling, yet oddly reassuring. The rest of the day was tense, filled with whispered warnings from servants and subtle tests from Cale. Ira observed the fortress carefully, noting which doors were locked, which tapestries seemed to move in the corners of her eyes, and how the shadows shifted around the Alpha. Every detail mattered, and every detail told a story she intended to understand. By evening, Kale led her to the edge of the fortress gardens, a place she had not dared explore alone. The moon rose, casting silver light over twisted trees and stone statues, and the shadows seemed to gather in the corners, watching, waiting. "You sensed it," Kale said, his voice low. He did not need to elaborate. She knew exactly what he meant. The shadow she had glimpsed the night before, moving with purpose, as though it had chosen her.
"Yes," she replied softly.
He studied her, and for the first time there was no trace of the coldness that had defined him. Instead, there was curiosity, almost a question in his gaze. Lyra held his look, silent and unflinching. A sudden rustle in the bushes drew their attention. Kale's hand moved instinctively toward the hilt of his sword, and Lyra's body tensed, ready. From the shadows emerged not an enemy, but a figure cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood. "Do not fear her," Kale said, his tone sharp, warningly. Lyra's eyes narrowed, but she stepped forward, driven by curiosity and resolve. The figure lifted its head slightly, revealing a faint glow beneath the hood, eyes that were not entirely human, yet not wholly spirit. It spoke, its voice soft, echoing like wind in a canyon. "You are the one bound to him," it said. "The one who will change the Empire." Lyra's pulse quickened. She did not understand entirely, but she sensed the truth in the words, the shadows, the whispers, and now this being. It all pointed to something larger than herself, something tied to Kale, to the Empire, and to a destiny she had not yet imagined. Kale's expression remained unreadable, but his hand brushed hers ever so slightly. A warning or perhaps a connection. Lyra did not withdraw. She was no longer merely a guest in this fortress. She was part of its story now, a story she could influence if she dared. The figure vanished as silently as it had appeared, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight and the rustle of leaves. Lyra's breath came in short, steadying bursts. Kale looked at her, gray eyes fixed on her face, searching for fear, and finding none. "You are braver than I expected," he said finally. "And stronger. That will be necessary. Shadows will not always reveal themselves so clearly." Lyra inclined her head once more, saying nothing. Her silence had become more than a shield. It had become a statement. She would not be controlled by fear, by whispers, or by the weight of an Alpha's expectations. They returned to the fortress, the corridors darker now in the silver glow of the moon. Lyra could feel the fortress itself shifting subtly, as if acknowledging her courage. She wondered if Kale felt it too, though he gave no hint. That night, as she lay in her chamber, the events of the day replayed in her mind. The shadow in the courtyard, the whispered warning, the mysterious figure in the garden, all of it pointed to a truth she could not yet name. But one thing was certain. She was no longer merely a bride forced into a fortress. She was a participant in a story of power, destiny, and magic, and she would not fade into silence. Outside her window, shadows moved again, though this time with purpose. They circled the fortress towers, drifting closer to her chamber. She felt their presence but did not panic. Instead, she studied them, learning their rhythm, their patterns, their subtle language. And in the distance, the Alpha watched. Kale did not sleep that night. He had observed Lyra's courage, her quiet strength, and her ability to face danger without flinching. It was a rare thing, rare enough that even he, the coldest Alpha in the Empire, felt a flicker of something he had long thought extinguished. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity, or the first stirrings of something far deeper. As the moon climbed higher, a shadow paused at her window, silent and observing. It whispered only a single word, carried by the night wind. Destiny. Lyra shivered, but not from fear. She drew her cloak tighter, her mind alert and ready. The fortress was alive. The Empire was dangerous. And Kale, the coldest Alpha, was watching her every move. But for the first time, Lyra realized that she was no longer afraid. She was ready. The fortress was quiet in the early morning, save for the faint rustle of servants moving through the halls. Lyra walked through the corridors, her steps soft but purposeful. The events of the previous day, the shadow in the courtyard, the whispered word of destiny, still lingered in her mind. She had faced fear and survived, but she sensed that her trials were only beginning. Kael observed her silently from a distance as she moved. He had not spoken much since the encounter in the garden, yet he watched her constantly, his gray eyes following her every motion. There was something in her presence that unsettled him. Not fear, not weakness, but something stronger, something that made him remember what he had long forgotten. Trust, courage, and perhaps even hope. "You move, as if the fortress were a part of you," Kael said finally, stepping out from the shadows. His voice was low, measured, almost unreadable. Lyra turned to face him, her expression calm. "I watch," she replied simply. "The fortress watches back. I learn from it." Kael studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Good. Observation is the first step. Strength is the second." Lyra inclined her head once, silent but understanding. She had noticed subtle things about the fortress. The way the shadows shifted, how doors seemed to guard secrets, how some walls hummed faintly with magic. She realized that this was not a home built for comfort, but a place forged to train, protect, and test. Their first official lesson began that morning. Kael led her to a hall lined with mirrors, each reflecting not just the room, but faint echoes of past events. "These mirrors show more than reflection," he said. "They reveal truth. You will learn what they show, or be consumed by what they hide." Lyra stepped forward carefully, peering into the nearest mirror. At first she saw only herself, pale and still, standing in the hall. Then, faintly, images appeared behind her. A boy she had never met, a battle she had never fought, shadows moving in shapes that felt familiar yet alien. She stumbled back slightly, but Kael's hand steadied her, his touch firm yet protective. "Do not fear what is shown," he said quietly. "Understanding it is the key to survival. You will need this knowledge soon." Lyra nodded, her pulse steadying. She was learning quickly, and she was beginning to see the fortress not as a prison, but as a teacher. Later that day, Kael summoned her to the throne room, a vast chamber of dark stone and cold light. The city below stretched endlessly, a maze of rooftops and spires. Kael's throne sat high above the hall, his presence commanding and absolute. "You must understand the world you are now a part of," Kael said, gesturing toward the city. "The Empire is filled with danger, political intrigue, betrayal, and forces that cannot be seen. You are no longer merely a noblewoman. You are my companion, whether you wish it or not. You must learn quickly." Lyra listened, absorbing every word. She had always known that power was dangerous, but seeing it in action, watching Kael command attention with a single glance, feeling the weight of his presence, made it real. "You hide nothing behind your silence," Kael said, his gaze piercing. "You are not afraid to observe, to endure. That makes you rare. Do not think that will go unnoticed." Lyra's lips pressed together. She did not speak, but she felt the weight of his words settle over her like armor. Silence had always been her defense, but she realized now it could also be her weapon. The day turned to evening, and Lyra returned to her chambers, only to find a message waiting for her. A small, folded note, sealed with a mark she did not recognize. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the words written in delicate, precise script. "The past will not stay buried. Seek the truth, or it will find you." Lyra's pulse quickened. She did not understand the message fully, but she sensed its urgency. She had already glimpsed shadows tied to Kael, whispers of a past he did not share. Perhaps this note was another piece of the puzzle, a warning or a challenge. That night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The fortress hummed around her, alive with whispers and shifting shadows. She thought of Kael, the cold alpha who had chosen her, or perhaps merely accepted her presence, and of the strength she had discovered within herself. The shadow in the courtyard, the mysterious figure in the garden, and the note all pointed to a truth she was not yet ready to face. A sudden tapping at the window startled her. She rose cautiously, moving to see a figure standing in the moonlight. It was small, cloaked, and familiar, the same figure that had appeared in the garden. It held a single key in its hand, dangling from a chain, and pressed it against the glass. Lyra opened the window carefully, and the figure handed her the key without a word. The moment her fingers touched it, a surge of energy ran through her, warm and alive. She understood instantly that this key opened more than doors. It opened secrets. Doors that Kale had kept locked for reasons she did not yet know. The next morning she approached Kale, key in hand. "I found this," she said softly, holding it out. Kale took it without hesitation, examining it carefully. "This belongs to a part of the fortress you are not yet ready to enter," he said. "But perhaps you are closer than I thought." Lyra inclined her head once more, silent. His words unsettled her more than any shadow ever had. There were parts of the fortress and parts of Kale's life that were hidden for a reason. But she was determined to uncover them, piece by piece, in her own time. Later that afternoon, Kyle summoned her to the training halls. He moved with precision, every step calculated, every gesture purposeful. He demonstrated combat techniques, not with the intention to teach brute force, but to reveal control, focus, and patience. Lyra mirrored his movements, learning quickly. Her body moved with instinct, but her mind remained alert, analyzing each motion, each subtle shift in Kale's posture. "You are skilled," Kale observed, his eyes sharp. "Skill without control is dangerous. You must learn both, or you will fail when the time comes." Lyra met his gaze, silent but determined. Control had always been something she valued. Control over her thoughts, her actions, her reactions. She would master it, and when the time came, she would stand beside him, not behind him. As evening fell, Kale led her to the highest tower of the fortress overlooking the city. The wind whipped around them cold and biting, but Lyra did not shiver. She stood firm, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You see the Empire," Kale said quietly, his voice barely rising above the wind. "Every shadow, every street, every secret, and soon you will understand the weight of choice." Lyra's heart pounded. The weight of choice, the shadows, the whispers, the destiny hinted at by the cloaked figure. All of it converged in this moment. She understood now that her journey had only begun, and that the fortress, the Alpha, and the Empire itself would test her in ways she had never imagined. A sudden scream shattered the quiet of the city below. Lyra and Kale both turned, eyes narrowing. Smoke rose in the distance, curling into the sky like a black ribbon. The shadows in the tower seemed to pulse with unease, and even Kale's expression darkened. "That is only the beginning," he said, his voice low, tense. "Prepare yourself. The Empire does not forgive weakness, and neither do its enemies." Lyra felt a surge of resolve. Fear had visited her often in the past days, but she had learned to face it, to stand firm, to act with courage. She would not falter now, not when so much depended on her strength and clarity. That night, as she lay awake in her chamber, the wind whispered through the fortress, carrying faint echoes of laughter, cries, and warnings. The shadows moved closer, as if drawn to her determination. She touched the key she had been given, feeling its warmth, its promise, and its challenge. She understood now. The fortress was alive. The Alpha was watching, and destiny had chosen her for a reason. And for the first time, Lyra felt a spark of certainty. She would not be merely the silent bride. She would be a force in her own right, standing beside the coldest Alpha in the Empire, facing the shadows, the whispers, and whatever trials awaited her. The moon hung low over the fortress, casting silver light on the cold stones. Lyra stood at the edge of the courtyard, the key from the cloaked figure held tightly in her hand. She had spent days studying the fortress, learning its secrets, its shadows, and its hidden dangers. She could feel the magic of the place, quiet and powerful, but restless. Something was stirring, something old and dangerous, and she knew was tied to Kale. Kale approached silently from behind, his long cloak brushing against the stones. He did not speak immediately, merely watching her, as if gauging her thoughts. Lyra did not turn. She had grown used to his presence, the silent tension that always followed him. "You have felt it," he said at last, his voice low and controlled. "The fortress shifts. The shadows move with purpose. You cannot ignore it any longer." Lyra nodded. "I know. It is alive. It is watching us." Kale's gray eyes narrowed, but he did not correct her. Instead, he led her through the corridors, past mirrors that shimmered with hidden images, past tapestries that whispered secrets of past rulers, until they reached a section of the fortress that had remained locked and silent. The key glowed faintly in Lyra's hand, responding to the magic embedded in the walls. "This is where the curse begins," Kale said, his tone sharper now, heavy with warning. "This is where you must learn the truth, about the fortress, the Empire, and about me." Lyra's heart quickened, but she did not speak. She stepped forward, placing the key in the ancient lock. The doors groaned and slowly swung open, revealing a hall filled with shadows that seemed to twist and move of their own accord. The air was thick, electric, as if alive with magic. Kale gestured for her to follow. "You must trust yourself and me. One misstep here could be dangerous." Lyra nodded, silent but steady. They moved deeper into the hall, the shadows swirling around them, whispering in voices she could not fully comprehend. At first, she felt fear, the familiar edge of panic. But then she remembered the lessons of the previous days, the courage she had found, the strength she had discovered. She drew herself taller, moving with purpose. A sudden shape emerged from the darkness. A figure cloaked in shadows, its face hidden beneath a hood. It was taller than any human, its movements graceful and unnerving. The shadows seemed to bend around it, parting and closing as if obeying its will. "You are close," it said, voice echoing as if from many places at once. "Closer than she has ever been. But are you ready to see what lies beneath?" Kale stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Lyra. "Do not test her," he said, his voice cold but edged with concern. "She is not your prey." The figure's laugh was low and hollow. "She is more than prey. She is bound to him, and through her, the past can be challenged or destroyed." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine, but she did not step back. Instead, she focused, reaching deep into herself. The key in her hand pulsed, warm and alive. She realized that she had been chosen not only to stand beside Kale, but to confront the darkness that haunted the fortress. The shadow figure lunged, not with violence, but with a force that pushed against her mind, probing her fears, her doubts. Lyra stumbled slightly, but she remembered Kale's lessons in control. She closed her eyes, breathing steadily, centering herself. Slowly, carefully she pushed back, holding her ground. Kale moved beside her, his presence steady and protective. He did not touch her, but his energy mingled with hers, strengthening her, anchoring her. Together, they stood against the force, the shadows swirling but unable to consume them. "You are stronger than I believed," the figure said, stepping back. "But strength alone is not enough. You must choose, or all will fall." Lyra opened her eyes. She understood now. The curse was not just a force outside of them. It was tied to Kale, to the fortress, to the history that had shaped him. And it was tied to her, to her courage and determination. She reached toward Kale instinctively, not needing to speak. Her gesture said everything. She would stand with him, face the darkness, and fight. Kale's gray eyes softened just slightly, the ice cracking. He nodded once. "Then we face it together." The shadow figure hissed, retreating into the darkness. "So be it. But beware. Not all bonds are forged in light. Some are born from pain." With that, it vanished, leaving only the whisper of wind and the faint pulse of magic in the air. Lyra exhaled slowly, her body trembling slightly from the strain. Cale reached out then, placing a firm hand on her shoulder, not to guide, but to steady. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "Do not doubt your place here. Do not doubt yourself. You are more than I expected." Lyra inclined her head, silent, but the warmth that spread through her chest was unmistakable. For the first time, she felt that Cale's coldness was not a wall to fear, but a shield to trust. The next days passed with more lessons, more tests, and more glimpses into Cale's past. He showed her old relics, weapons, and scrolls, each carrying a story of betrayal, loss, or sacrifice. Lyra absorbed them all, understanding not only the power Cale wielded, but the burden he carried, the solitude, the fear, and the weight of responsibility. One evening, Cale brought her to the fortress gardens, now bathed in silver moonlight. The shadows were quieter, almost respectful, as if they had recognized her strength. "You are changing," Cale said softly, his eyes searching hers. "The fortress senses it. The shadows sense it. And I sense it." Lyra felt a flicker of emotion, something she had not expected. A warmth, a connection, a quiet understanding. She did not speak, but her eyes held Cale's, steady and unflinching. "You are not like anyone I have known," Cale continued. "Most would flee, would cower. You endure. You face what others fear." Lyra felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but she did not move. Instead, she nodded once, silently acknowledging his words. For the first time, she sensed that Cale saw her not merely as a bride or a companion, but as an equal, someone capable of standing beside him. The peace was short-lived. From the edge of the garden, a ripple of shadows moved, darker and sharper than before. Lyra's pulse quickened. Cale's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer to her. "They are not finished," he said, his voice low. "The curse is tied to the past, and it does not forgive easily. We must be ready." Lyra felt the weight of his words, but she did not step back. She had faced shadows before, seen the fortress test her, and confronted her own fears. She was not afraid now. Not when Cale stood beside her. Together, they approached the source of the movement, a black mist that twisted and writhed, forming shapes that whispered secrets, fears, and half-truths. Lyra held out the key, and it glowed brightly, pushing back against the darkness. The mist recoiled slightly, but it did not vanish. Cale placed a hand near hers, not touching, but his presence amplified the key's power. The shadow shrieked, pulling back into corners, hissing in frustration. Lyra's mind focused, her heart steady. She realized that the curse had been testing not only Cale, but her courage, her strength, and her willingness to stand beside him in darkness. "You are ready?" Cale said, his voice firm. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Lyra's eyes met his. For the first time, words were unnecessary. Her silence had spoken, loud and clear. She would endure. She would fight. She would stand with him, not behind him, not as a shadow, but as a partner. The black mist retreated, disappearing into the walls, leaving only the faint echo of its whispers. Lyra exhaled slowly, relief and exhaustion mingling in her chest. Cale's gaze softened, a rare moment of warmth breaking through his usual cold exterior. "Do not let your guard down," he warned, though his tone lacked its usual harshness. "This is only the beginning. The Empire, the shadows, the past, all of it will challenge you. But I trust you, Lyra, more than I have trusted anyone in years."
Lyra inclined her head silently.
Trust was a fragile thing, and she knew that. But she also knew that she had found a bond in Cale, one forged not in fear, not in obligation, but in shared strength, courage, and determination. As they returned to the fortress, the night air thick with magic and whispers, Lyra felt a quiet determination settle within her. The shadows would not break her. The curse would not claim her. She would stand beside Cale, ready to face whatever the Empire or fate itself might bring.